Hello and welcome back. Today we are talking about different forms of assessment, 6 different forms of assessment. So today you will understand the main forms of assessment that are used on a language course. They may not be found on every course, but most of them are on any course that you will be involved in. And one of the points I want to make, of course, is that assessment is not the same thing as testing. You can assess without testing. This is a point we'll come back to later. So let's look at the first of the 6 types of assessment, and this is placement assessment. Now, placement assessment may not happen on every course, but it happens on courses where you answer or want to answer one of 2 questions. One question might be, do I want this person onto my course? Does she or he meet the requirements for this course? The other one might be, what class or level do I put this student into? Now, because of the nature of placement assessment, it often has to be done quite quickly. This is an issue of practicality, and practicality is something we talk about on another video. The second type of assessment to focus on is diagnostic assessment. This is hugely important. We need to find out what our learners can and cannot do. And diagnostic assessment is something we talk about in much more detail when we talk about assessment and curriculum design. I would say that if you don't have diagnostic assessment, you really don't know what you're doing with your students. The third type is short-term achievement. Now, this is something that teachers do for themselves and their students. They do in class. It's often very linked to a specific part of the program, a recent activity, a recent learning goal. This is why it's called short-term. And it can be very flexible. And again, this is the subject of another film. Similar to short-term achievement is achievement assessment. Now, perhaps the main difference here is in the timing. So achievement assessment is often towards the end of a course when we want to find out how much they've learned over the whole program. Short-term achievement assessment is much more focused in what it's testing. The next one is perhaps my favourite, observation of learning. And this is the one where it's absolutely clear that assessment is not the same thing as testing. Observation of learning is, as its name suggests, related to what the teacher can see happening in the classroom. She needs to know, what are the signs of learning happening? How will I know if my learners are happening? Observation of learning is something you, as a teacher, should be doing all of the time. And again, this is something that you will find more about in another video. The final one I want to touch on, to introduce today, is proficiency testing. Proficiency testing is about someone's global competence in the language. Therefore, it's very hard to teach towards. There are lots of examples of proficiency testing out there in the world, and you will be perhaps familiar with names like TOEFL and IELTS, and TOEIC is another one. These are internationally recognized English language proficiency exams. So there we are. That's an overview of the 6 different forms of assessment that are typically used in a course, and a goal for you is to think about how these are used and when they are used in your program. So now, just to give an idea of what it might look like in a program, we're going to talk about assessment in a program in my school, the School of Linguistics and Applied Language Studies at Victoria University of Wellington. It's the English Proficiency Programme, and we're going to have an interview with Dr. Angela Joe, who is the director of the English Language Institute. Well, I'm very happy to be here with Dr. Angela Joe, who's the Director of the English Language Institute at Victoria University of Wellington. So welcome, Angela.
Oh, nice to be here today, John.
And I know you have many programs in your school. So we're going to talk today about the English Proficiency Programme.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a bit about what that program is?
Yes. Well, the English Proficiency Programme is a 12-week English for academic purposes program that prepares students for further study at undergraduate or postgraduate level.
So clearly it's a course that is important to the students, it's high stakes. So what's their first experience of assessment when they join the course?
So on the very first day of the course, students sit a placement test, and that allows us to stream them into proficiency levels.
Okay, great. And what form does this placement test take?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are four main tasks, actually. They sit a dictation, they have a vocabulary task, they also have a C-test, and we also take a writing sample from those students as well.
And how long do the teachers have for marking this?
Well, with all placement tests, it's important to be practical, and so it doesn't take a large amount of time when there's a large team of teachers.
That's great, that's great. And so the students are there in the class, they're put in the class, they start learning. What other assessment do they experience?
Well, like on all courses, we have both formative and summative tasks. We have in-course tasks and which can be contributing to their final grade, but at the very end of the 12-week program there is a week of assessment as well. So the kind of tasks we have at the initial part of the program in particular are diagnostic tasks. Okay. Yeah, so the diagnostic tasks can be, for example, looking at their vocabulary scores, looking at the kind of writing they do, and getting a sense of their strengths and weaknesses in the different skill areas.
So diagnostic tests are, of course, very, very important to give teachers an understanding of what students can and can't do. So are these just tests that teachers carry out, or are they other forms of assessment that teachers do for diagnostic purposes?
Well, they're not only tests, and I think it's important that we have the kinds of tasks that sort of replicate the kind of context they're going into. So, for example, there may be a note-taking task of a live lecture, and an opportunity for students to have a task that is then discussed in class, and then they identify themselves with their peers, areas in which they've done well on, and areas in which they have weakness. So there's kind of a reflection task that is part of the diagnostic.
So that's like a form of learner self-assessment? A
learner self-assessment, which is part of that reflection cycle. So I guess in a way it's kind of feed forward, if you like. So looking back and then looking forward to say, what can I do next time? Yeah.
That sounds great. And so towards the end of the course, how long is the course?
So it's a 12-week program, and there are sort of assessment tasks right through the program.
Okay. And towards the end of the 12 weeks, presumably there are achievement or proficiency tests that students have to take. So what form do those take?
Okay. Well, we have listening, speaking, reading and writing tests. And like all good end of proficiency kind of tests, it's important that we have triangulation of the different skills. So we always have more than one task for each skill. So, for example, in writing, we have an argumentation, the genre is argumentation, we have that task, and we also have some kind of data commentary task. For speaking, we have an interview where they sit down with a teacher and they talk about content that they have studied on the program. And we also have a 10-minute academic presentation where they are speaking to their classmates as the academic audience. And the third rating for speaking is in-course evidence that teachers have gathered informally through the course. So then we come to reading, and so there are 3 tests for reading. One is a longer text that looks at discourse features, And then we have two shorter tasks. One looks at multiple perspectives, looking at sources within the text, and another one looks at sort of more detailed comprehension. And then we come to listening. Again, there are 3 tests of listening. One is dictation, which is very form-focused. Another is a note-taking from an unscripted live lecture that has been recorded. And then the final task is a gap-fill listening, which is really quite good for those who have got slightly lower proficiency, because it gives them an opportunity to demonstrate their ability in listening.
So you talk about triangulation, which I guess I would also refer to as reliability. Is that be a fair comment?
I think that's fair in the sense that we're looking at consistent performance and trying to look at how students' different knowledge is sort of demonstrated through different tasks, and making sure that the scores that we have at the end do represent what we think is their ability, which is representative of consistent performance, if you like.
Okay, great. Thank you. And one thing that really interests me is your speaking assessment. So I guess you have many teachers in many classes. And so how do you ensure that reliable marks are being given by teachers working independently assessing speaking performance?
I think that's a really good question, actually. We have what we call calibration sessions, which is particularly important for new teachers. Similarly, for all teachers, every course, we have a bank of materials which are digitally recorded, and so we have descriptors. For example, for the seminars, we have criteria for the genre, for example, language features, and teachers watch those scripts and rate them independently. And then there's an opportunity for discussion, which is really important because it's trying to ensure that teachers are marking consistently across the program using the benchmarks.
That's great. I'm sure that's very important for the students to be reassured of that, because it's obviously a high-stakes test for the students, gives them entry to university. So just a final question, Angela. Is there anything that you would change, or how often do you change the assessment in the course? How do you keep it up to date and relevant?
Well, that's a good question. It's quite a challenging task to make sure that we keep sort of the battery relevant and up to date. So we do have teachers currently, for example, to make sure that we have more than one set of sort of end of course assessments as well as placements. So we try to have multiple sets of materials, and we need to also update the writing prompts in particular, because they can, get out of date quite easily. One of the things I think that's important in terms of parity and fairness is having a process whereby students are confident that the grades that they receive have been thoroughly scrutinised, if you like. And so what we do is that at the end of the course, teachers look at the raw scores and they look to make sure that the scores are representative of the classwork that students have done. And so there's a mediation and advocacy sort of process with the course coordinators, where we're able to look at performance and make sure that evidence gathered through the course is brought to bear as we finalise those grades.
Great. So it sounds to me like you've established a very robust and efficient system of assessment for this program, which is fantastic. So thank you for coming and sharing this with us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you very much.
You're welcome, John. And we look forward to making sure that we try to update our materials. It is, as I say, it is very resource intensive. But it's nice to talk to you today too.
Thank you.